Two uniformed officers approached a modestly dressed woman and quietly asked her to leave her own son's award ceremony. Not because she had caused a disruption but because her coat was tattered, and her shoes lacked shine. She didn't argue, she didn't shout, she simply stood still, silently holding something in her hand. And in just moments, the atmosphere in the grand room shifted, conversations halted, champagne glasses were frozen midair. The men seated in the back well, they weren't just ordinary guests, and they weren't pleased. What was she holding? What stopped a room full of elite strangers in their tracks? The answer speaks louder than any tribute or speech ever could. Drop your guess in the comments. Chances are, you'll be closer than the people in that room were. Inside the grand ballroom of the Riverside Convention Center, the sound of cheerful chatter mingled with the clink of crystal glasses. Gleaming chandeliers cast golden light on men in tailored suits and women in high-end gowns. It was the city's annual event honoring military hero Essa, an affair of polished appearances and performative generosity. Then, as sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, a figure appeared at the entrancia, one that didn't match the world of privilege surrounding it. Cheryl Mason stood quietly, gripping a worn envelope in her hands. At 45, life's hardships had etched deep lines into her face. Her silver-streaked hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, her faded coat clearly a veteran of many winters, and her shoes scuffed from too many weary steps. Clutched tightly in her trembling hand was a photograph of a young soldier, his smile proud, hopeful. The contrast between Cheryl and the glittering crowd was unmistakable. Conversations dimmed to murmurs as eyes turned, and quiet judgment spread through the room. "Ma'am, I think you might be lost," said a voice behind her. Officer Kane, young and full of self-assurance, approached with Officer Brooks close behind. Kane was tall, square-jawed, and moved like someone who had already decided who was worthy of standing where. His uniform was pressed, his badge spotless, and his tone dismissive as his gaze swept over Cheryl. "This is a private function. Invitation only. You'll have to leave." Cheryl held her envelope tighter. "I do have an invitation," she said, her voice soft but firm. "My so broken bar, he's being honored today." She extended the wrinkled paper toward him, her hands unsteady. Kane glanced at it with little interest, then dismissed it with a scoff. "Ma'am, I'm sure you think you do, but this doesn't look official." His tone was firm, his posture unmoving. "These events are for military families. You don't exactly fit the profile. I'm asking you to leave." Ian nicely. Brooks stepped to the side, subtly blocking her path. The show of force was clear. Across the hall, Tyler Blackwood observed the growing tension. A wealthy businessman whose company had underwritten much of the event, his name and branding were plastered across the venue. Wearing a sleek Armani suit and gleaming leather shoes, Tyler embodied power, and he walked like he owned the building. "What's going on here?" he asked, though the smug tilt of his voice suggested he already approved of how things were being handled. "We're escorting out someone who wandered in by mistake," Kane responded, puffing his chest slightly in Tyler's presence. "She claims she has an invite, but clearly it's a misunderstanding." Tyler's gaze scanned Cheryl up and down, his expression betraying no compassion. "Well," he said flatly, "we can't just let anyone in here. These families have sacrificed too much to be disrupted." He motioned vaguely in Cheryl's direction, as if she were an inconvenience to be cleared away. Cheryl's hands began to shake harder, but her voice didn't waver. "I'm the mother of a soldier," she said, locking eyes with Tyler. "My son, Jake Mason, died serving this country. He's the one being honored today. I have every right to be here." Her words were rushed and desperate, yet they were the raw truth. But to the men around her, it was almost laughable. Kane chuckled coldly. "Lady, you've been watching too many war dramas. Military families don't look like a broken bar." This. With clear irritation, he reached for the envelope in her hands. "Let's see this so-called invitation." Before Cheryl could stop him, Kane snatched the paper away. Without opening it, he ripped it clean in half. The sound of the tear echoed like a thunderclap in the hushed room. Cheryl dropped to her knees, frantic hands trying to gather the torn pieces, her face crumpling as tears streamed down. "Please," she choked, her voice cracking. "That was all I had." "You don't understand a broken bar." But Kane wasn't finished. He yanked the photo from her other hand and held it up mockingly. "This your son?" he sneered. "Looks like any soldier to me." Probably picked this up at a pawn shop. Then, without hesitation, he let the photo fly and crushed it beneath his boot. The glass shattered with a crack that felt like a punch to Cheryl's chest. She let out a broken sob that rose from the core of her being. A crowd had formed. They watched, murmuring, uncomfortably but unmoved. No one stepped in. No one dared cross Tyler. "That's enough," Tyler finally said, his voice firm with authority. "Get her out of here, now." Kane reached down and seized Cheryl's arm. As Kane reached out to forcibly remove Cheryl, something in the room changed. The moment his hand touched her shoulder, a subtle tension snapped into sharp focus. From the back row, where 8 men in dark, tailored suits had been silently observing, came the sound of chairs sliding against polished floors. In perfect unison, they stood. There was something about the way they moved, a precise, deliberate that immediately shifted the room's energy. A calm but firm voice rang out from the back, slicing through the silence like a cold blade. "I'd advise you to take your hand off her." The command carried a gravity no one dared ignore. Officer Kane's fingers froze mid-grip, his confidence visibly shaken as he turned to locate the speaker. The man was already approaching, backed by 7 others who radiated a quiet authority. They weren't ordinary guests, their presence carried the unmistakable weight of experience and power. Leading the group was Captain Reed. At 52, his upright posture and steely gaze left no doubt that he was a man forged in battle, not in boardrooms. His military dress uniform was spotless, decorated with ribbons and medals that told stories of valor and loss. His eyes, sharp and unflinching, locked onto Kane with a look that made even seasoned men rethink their actions. "I's to take your hand off her," he repeated, his tone layered with years of command and consequence. The others stayed in place but were clearly ready to step in. Though dressed in civilian suits, their bearing screamed discipline and readiness. Kane quickly dropped his hand, as though burned. "Sir, with all due respect, I don't know who you are, but I'm just doing my job." Before he could finish, Captain Reed's voice cut through again, sharper this time. "Mrs. Mason has more right to be here than anyone in this room." He stepped beside Cheryl, who was still on her knees, trying to gather the shredded remains of her son's invitation. Her hands trembled with grief and fury. Tyler Blackwood moved closer, his expression tight with indignation. "Captain Reed, I assume?" "I'm Tyler Blackwood, the main sponsor of this event. I appreciate your service, but I can't allow anyone to disrupt the ceremony's dignity." His voice carried the entitlement of a man used to controlling situations with money, not integrity. Murmurs swept through the crowd. People shifted uneasily. They were beginning to realize this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was something far more serious. Tyler, who had entered the scene with smug control, was suddenly scrambling to maintain it. "That's not possible," Tyler muttered, his certainty faltering. Cheryl's voice cut through the murmur like a bell. Though tear-streaked, it rang clear and steady. "Jake Mason. My son's name is Jake Mason. He gave his life in service to this country." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some people exchanged looks of recognition. A few instinctively pulled out their phones, sensing they were witnessing something momentous. Captain Reed placed a firm, protective hand on Cheryl's shoulder, a quiet gesture of both support and authority. "Mrs. Mason was personally invited to witness the honor her son earned," he said, addressing the room. "Anyone who believes she doesn't belong here doesn't understand what sacrifice truly means." Tyler's face reddened. His previously composed mask was slipping fast. Around him, the murmurs were turning into quiet judgments. Some guests began glancing at him with uncertainty, even disdain. Kane and Brooks exchanged nervous glances, their earlier certainty completely gone. Captain Reed turned to the event staff, who had been watching in stunned silence. "Prepare for the special honors ceremony," he instructed, his voice broking no argument. The staff nodded instinctively, already moving to comply. "We'll need the full honor guard, immediately." Tyler's complexion paled. Reality was setting in. Captain Reed wasn't bluffing, and control of the room was no longer his. "You can't be serious," Tyler said, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. "I've poured thousands into this event." Captain Reed's expression hardened. "Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you take a seat and prepare to learn the meaning of real honor. What you're about to witness will change everything you thought you understood about sacrifice." He gestured to the 7 men still in the back, and they began walking forward with purposeful strides. The crowd parted instinctively, the tension in the air sharp and rising. Tyler could only watch, helpless. As the tide turned completely against him, the room fell into heavy silence as the full weight of what was happening settled over the guests. Tyler stood frozen, his mind reeling. Kane and Brooks no longer knew where to stand or what to say. Their authority had melted away. Guests formed a loose semicircle around the confrontation, their expensive drinks forgotten. What had started as a petty disturbance had revealed itself as something profoundly meaningful. Captain Reed turned back toward Cheryl, but this time his voice addressed everyone in the room. "There's something you all need to know about Jake Mason," he began, his tone grave and deliberate. The room grew quieter still. 6 months ago, Jake Mason was killed in Afghanistan. He was just 24, a sergeant in the U.S. Army. He gave his life in service to this nation. He paused, letting the truth settle. His mother, Cheryl Mason, has waited all this time to see her son recognized, to watch the country he died for honor him. Gasps broke out. The silence was no longer respectful, it was stunned. Tyler stumbled backward, disbelief twisting across his face. "You're saying this woman Isa Broken Bar is his mother?" He gestured vaguely, as though her worn coat and tired eyes made it impossible to believe. But the confidence had drained from his voice. The crowd began to move. Some stepped forward, others backed away, unsure of how to respond. But everyone understood. This was no longer just a ceremony. This was a reckoning. "You think dignity is about fancy clothing?" Cheryl asked, her voice gaining strength with each syllable. "You think sacrifice is measured by how fat your wallet is?" She stepped forward, and not timid, not shrinking but upright, proud. Though she wasn't tall, the room seemed to shrink around her. Silence settled over the space, as though the chandeliers themselves were listening. "I worked 3 jobs so my son could go to school," she said, her voice now cutting clearly through the silence. "I sold our home so he could wear that uniform. I gave up everything so he could serve this country with pride." The honesty in her words, so raw and unvarnished, charged the air. A hum of discomfort passed through the crowd as reality began to settle in. Many began to realize the truth. What they had just witnessed wasn't a disruption, it was disgrace. "My son Jake Mason gave his life for this country," she declared, her voice reverberating with power. The words hit the room with such intensity that it was as if the very air had shifted. Then, from the third row, an older woman wearing a faded military service jacket stood up. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, her posture straight and steady as she had the calm authority of someone shaped by a lifetime of service. "I'm the mother of a veteran," she said clearly, "and if what you've said is true, a broken bar, then I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." A ripple moved through the room like a quiet tremor. People glanced at one another, unsure, unsettled. Then a man in his 50s, African American, seated just beside her, leaned forward. He didn't whisper, but his voice wasn't loud either. Still, nearby guests heard him clearly. "I was stationed in Kandahar," he said slowly. "Jake Mason. The name. I remember him now." That spark of recognition shifted everything. A few guests pulled out their phone, some searching discreetly, others looking like they were putting pieces together from memory. A young couple near the back of the room recoiled at the drama but didn't walk away. The woman clutched her husband's arm tightly. "He's real," she whispered. "This isn't a scam. Just look at Hira Broken Bar and look at those Marines." Suddenly, the crowd's mood transformed. Understanding swept through like a slow, rising tide. And for the first time, Cheryl stood with the weight of others behind her. Tyler opened his mouth, but before a word escaped, Captain Reed raised his hand, silencing him without needing to speak. The room waited. Cheryl took another step, her presence commanding despite her simple dress. "My son died so other people's children could live. He gave his life protecting soldiers who got to go home." She raised a trembling finger and pointed directly at Tyler. "Jake Mason was a hero." Captain Reed's voice followed immediately, sharp as a blade. "He died performing an act of courage so rare, it will be remembered for generations." A solemn hush fell. The tone of the entire event had shifted, no longer polished or performative, but sacred. Tyler looked around in panic. The carefully curated image, the power he'd worn so comfortably, was crumbling before him. The officers who had once stood firm had backed away, silent and shamed. The guests were staring at Tyler now, but with eyes full of reproach, not admiration. The elegant charity event he thought he owned had transformed into something else entirely. But Tyler's biggest mistake wasn't visible in the decorations or the ruined mood that had been heard. Every insult, every demeaning comment, every arrogant dismissal of Cheryl and her son had been overheard by the 7 men who now stood like silent sentinels, advancing slowly from the back. And the look in their eyes was colder than fury. "Mr. Blackwood," Captain Reed said, his voice low, so quiet it forced the room to lean in, "you just made the gravest mistake of your life." He pointed to the 7 men now forming a tight arc around him and Cheryl. "Those mean a broken bar, they're Marines. And Jake Mason saved every last one of them." The words fell like stones in a still pond, creating ripple after ripple of stunned silence. Tyler's face drained of color. He finally grasped the enormity of what he had walked into, and it was far, far beyond anything he could buy his way out of. The 7 Marines moved with purpose, surrounding Cheryl and Captain Reed in a semicircle. Though dressed in plain suits, they stood with the unmistakable discipline of soldiers on parade. Their posture, their silence, their eyes, everything about them screamed loyalty, unity, reverence. The lead Marine stepped forward, a man in his early 30s, bearing a long scar down his jawline. When he spoke, the quiet power in his voice demanded full attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, slow and deliberate, "I'm Sergeant First Class Martinez, and these men behind me, these are my brothers." His gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of every guest. "6 months ago, we were on patrol in the mountains of Afghanistan. It was supposed to be routine, but we were ambushed, trapped in a narrow valley, outnumbered, outgunned, with nowhere to go." He paused. The room seemed to shrink around his voice. "We should have died that day." Martinez's eyes grew distant. He wasn't speaking to a crowd now, he was back there, reliving it. His voice grew more intense. "We were pinned down, bullets everywhere, rocks exploding, metal ricocheting, 12 of us huddled behind cover, breathing like it was our last breath. Not a sound in the room, not a cough, not a rustle of fabric, just Martinez's voice, echoing like thunder in a church. We started calling our families, leaving our goodbyes, one by one, but Jake didn't say a word." Martinez's throat tightened. He took a moment before continuing. He just sat there, checking his rifle, focused. "We all knew that it meant he was about to do something crazy." The sergeant took a breath, eyes shining now. Then suddenly, he stood up, looked at all of us, and said, "I'll draw their fire. Get ready to move when I do." Martinez's voice cracked, but he pushed through. Before we could stop him, he vaulted over the rock we were behind. He started yelling, shooting, making himself the biggest target imaginable. The enemy fire shifted instantly. We could hear it, see it. He was still running, still drawing fire, when our path to safety opened. That was our chance. That was when we escaped. Sergeant Martinez's hands trembled as he spoke, his voice thick with memory and grief. The weight of his words wrapped around the room, turning it into a sacred space. Captain Reed stepped forward, his dress uniform catching and refracting the chandelier's soft glow. "What Sergeant Martinez just described," he said solemnly, "is an act of unthinkable bravery. Jake Mason didn't wait for backup, he didn't take the safer option. He ran directly into enemy fire so his brothers could live. You could hear the faint buzz of the air conditioner, nothing else." Tyler's face had drained of color. His smugness had evaporated, replaced with disbelief. 12 lives? He muttered, barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, hollow now that they came from him. Captain Reed raised his voice just enough to ensure the entire room heard. "Today, Jake Mason is being awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest distinction this nation can give. It is granted only in the most extraordinary circumstances, a broken bar when someone risks their life far beyond the call of duty." Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Guests leaned in, some clutching hands or wiping away tears. A younger Marine stepped forward, emotion thick in his throat. "Mama, broken bar, your son saved my life. I was pinned under a burning Humvee. Jake ran through gunfire to drag me out. I have a wife, a baby girl. Because of him, a broken bar, I came home." Then another spoke up, voice steady but raw. Jake carried me for 2 miles after I took a round to the leg. He could have left me, it would have made things easier. But he wouldn't leave a man behind. Each Marine, one after another, stepped forward to share a piece of Jake Mason's final day. With every account, the same message rang out: he didn't just serve, he saved. As the testimonies unfolded, a profound stillness gripped the room. Reverence settled over every guest, replacing whatever judgments they had carried in. Captain Reed reached into his jacket and removed a worn, folded piece of paper. Its edges were creased and yellowed, evidence of its importance. "This is Jake's final letter home," he said quietly. He wrote it the night before that mission, and knowing it might be his last. With deep care, he handed the letter to Cheryl, as if passing along something sacred. Her hand shook as she opened it. The handwriting was instantly familiar, even through her tears. "Dear Mom," she read, her voice quivering with grief, "if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home, but I want you to know I did what I did because you showed me what courage looks like. You taught me that bravery isn't about being fearless, a broken bar, it's doing what's right even when you're afraid." The room was silent except for the soft, muffled sounds of guests sweeping. Even Officer Kane had removed his cap and held it respectfully, his earlier bravado nowhere to be seen. Tyler Blackwood stood like a statue, hollow-eyed, his expression blank with realization. He had mocked a man worthy of the highest honor the nation could give. And now, that man's mother stood in front of him, not just vindicated but revered. From the back of the room, a final figure rose. Master Sergeant Williams was older than the rest, silver streaking his dark hair. Lines carved deep into his face spoke of experience, hardship, and sacrifice. He walked to the front. The other Marines instinctively straightened as he approached. "I was Jake's squad leader," he said, his voice low but commanding. "I held him as he died." The room didn't move. No one breathed. His last words were, "Tell my mom I kept my promise. Tell her I was brave." That was the moment when whatever composure remained finally broke. All around the ballroom, people wept. Tyler seemed to shrink, buried beneath the crushing weight of what he had said, what he had done, and what he had failed to understand. The 8 Marines moved in unison, forming a line in front of Cheryl. As one, they stood at attention and saluted. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. It was a recognition of her grief, of her strength, of her identity as a Gold Star mother, a woman who had given her son to the nation. They held the salute for several long, solemn seconds. When they finally lowered their arms, not a single dry eye remained in the room. Several guests had pulled out their phone as a not to share the moment, but to preserve it. They understood they were witnessing history. "Mrs. Mason," Captain Reed said, adopting the formal tone of a military ceremony, "on behalf of a grateful nation, I present to you the Medal of Honor, posthumously awarded to your son, Sergeant Jake Mason, for extraordinary gallantry and sacrifice beyond the call of duty." He extended a polished wooden box. Its surface was worn smooth from careful handling, the contents inside far heavier than the medal itself. Cheryl reached out with trembling fingers. She touched the box like it held his heartbeat, like she could feel her son through the grain of the wood. "He was just my little boy," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of a mother's love, pride, and unimaginable loss. Months of grief and pride swirled inside her as Cheryl held the wooden box close to her chest. "He was just my Jake," she whispered, her voice cracking with love and loss. "He only ever wanted to help people." She gently opened the box, her fingers trembling. The Medal of Honor shimmered beneath the chandelier light, its blue ribbon and star-shaped medallion glowing like it carried a fire of its own. At the podium, the Master of Ceremonies had been frozen, too stunned to speak. He lifted the microphone in an effort to return to protocol, but no words came. His voice caught in his throat, and with tear-filled eyes, he lowered the mic and stepped back, surrendering to the gravity of the moment. In the front row, a retired general stood slowly, dressed in full uniform. He removed his cap and pressed it over his heart, his head bowed. His silver hair caught the light, glinting like a symbol of time and duty. The simplicity and sincerity of his gesture rippled through the room like a wave of realization. Near the aisle, a little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and spoke with childlike innocency but enough volume for others to hear. "Mommy, I want to meet Mr. Jake." Her words sliced through the heaviness in the air, reminding everyone present that true heroism plants seeds in young hearts and grows. As though moved by a collective spirit, the entire auditorium began to rise. No announcement, no request. One by one, the audience stood, row after row, in silent tribute. Then came the applause, not the enthusiastic clapping of a gala, but slow, steady, and reverent, like the heartbeat of a nation honoring one of its own. Guests who had arrived with shallow conversations and designer suits now stood transformed, recognizing that the stage had become something else entirely. It wasn't about social capital or charitable optics. It was about truth, and honor, and sacrifice. Tyler Blackwood felt crushed by the weight of his earlier arrogance. He had dismissed Jake Mason as nothing more than a faceless casualty, a man who had made a foolish choice. But now, that illusion shattered before him. Jake Mason wasn't a careless soldier. He had been everything Tyler had only pretended to be: brave, selfless, honorable. A man who made the ultimate sacrifice not for recognition but because it was the right thing to do. Cheryl pressed the medal to her chest. The 8 Marines remained around her, their formation solid, unmoving, a human shield of loyalty and reverence. They weren't just there to witness, they were there to guard hero Jake's mother, the woman who raised a hero. Their presence had changed the entire energy of the room. What began as Tyler Blackwood's social showcase had become something sacred, a ceremony of real meaning, of national memory. The chandeliers above no longer glimmered over luxury and idle chatter. Now, their light illuminated the raw and honest truth of heroism, something no money could buy. Master Sergeant Williams stepped forward again. His face, carved by years of service, bore the solemn dignity of a man who had seen too much and remembered everything. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Cheryl with unwavering respect, "your son didn't just save our lives, he saved our future as our families, the children who will grow up with their fathers because of him. We are here today not only to honor Sergeant Jake Mason, but to honor you and the woman who raised him." Then, the 8 Marines came to attention one final time. In perfect unison, they raised their hands and saluted. It was a moment of flawless military precision in an otherwise civilian setting, and yet, it felt like the most appropriate gesture the room had ever seen. In that instant, every persona, regardless of status, wealth, or politics, understood that they were witnessing something transcendent, something sacred, a moment where the highest form of courage met the deepest form of love. And standing just outside that circle of reverence was Tyler Blackwood, silent, breath shallow, unable to escape the crushing truth of what he had done. He had arrived as the event's most powerful man. Now, he stood exposed and small, his influence evaporated under the judgment of 8 solemn warriors. Master Sergeant Williams turned to him, eyes cold as iron. "You have 30 seconds, he said evenly, "to explain to Mrs. Mason why you destroyed her invitation, a broken bar, why you insulted her son's memory on the very day he was to be honored." The quiet power in his voice was more piercing than any scream. It was the voice of a man who had faced death and would not tolerate disrespect. Tyler's mouth opened, but no sound came at first. Then finally, a broken stammer. "A broken bar? I didn't know. I thought she was just a broken bar. I mean, she looked a broken bar." He stopped, realizing there was nothing he could say that wouldn't make it worse. "You thought she was what?" snapped a younger Marine, eyes blazing. "Just a poor woman who didn't deserve to be here? Someone who didn't look the part?" The room turned colder with every word. Tyler stood speechless. Cheryl, still clutching the medal, looked at him, and not with fury, but with something far more painful: sorrow. "My son died for you too," she said gently, her voice resonating through the stunned silence. "He didn't ask what people looked like, or how much money they made. He just did what needed to be done." Each word struck Tyler like a hammer blow. He had built a life on shallow power, on appearances and status. But here stood a mother who had lost everything except her dignity, and somehow, she still carried more strength in her grief than he ever had in his wealth. She held a box in her hands, months of grief and pride crashing together in her chest. "He was just my Jake," she whispered, her voice heavy with love and loss. "He only wanted to help people." With trembling hands, Cheryl opened the box. The Medal of Honor glinted beneath the chandelier light. Its blue ribbon and star-shaped medallion seemed to glow from within, as though lit by the spirit of her son. At the podium, the Master of Ceremonies, who had been motionless throughout the confrontation, finally stepped forward. He lifted the microphone to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. Overwhelmed, he lowered it again, eyes glistening, and stepped back into silence. From the front row, a retired general slowly rose to his feet. Without a word, he removed his cap and placed it over his heart. His silver hair shimmered under the lights as he bowed his head, a gesture so sincere it moved through the room like a wave. Then came the smallest voice, one that pierced the formality like sunlight through storm clouds. "Mommy, I want to meet Mr. Jake," a young girl whispered, tugging her mother's sleeve. That child's voice cut through the relevant hush, reminding everyone that heroism, when true, touches even the youngest souls. And then it happened. Without direction or announcement, the audience began to rise. Row by row, person after person stood, moved by a force larger than themselves. Applause followed, and not the eager clapping of celebration, but the slow, solemn cadence of collective reverence. It was the heartbeat of a nation grieving, remembering, and honoring. What began as a glittering social event had been transformed, no longer about prestige or donation totals. This moment now belonged to something far deeper, something real. Tyler Blackwood stood among them, the weight of his actions pressing down like iron. Moments ago, he had called Jake Mason a nobody, dismissed a grieving mother as unworthy. Now, he saw it clearly. Jake had been everything he was not: selfless, courageous, and profoundly human. Cheryl held the medal to her chest. Around her, the 8 Marines held their formation, not as guards, but as living testaments to her son's sacrifice. They were here for her, for Jake, and for every mother who had ever wept beside a folded flag. Master Sergeant Williams stepped forward again, his face etched with years of war and remembrance. "Ma'am," he said, voice strong but tender, "your son didn't just save our lives. He saved our families. He gave our children fathers. He gave our wives husbands. He gave us time we didn't earn. And we are here, all of us, not only to honor Jacob but to honor you." Then the 8 Marines came to attention once more, their salute sharp, perfect. In that motion was a depth of meaning beyond words, a sacred gesture, a recognition of the woman who had given her country everything. And finally, Tyler moved. Quietly, he stepped forward. His posture was no longer proud, it was humble. His voice broke as he dropped to his knees in front of Cheryl. "Mrs. Mason," he choked out, "I am the most foolish man who ever lived. I insulted your son's memory. I destroyed your invitation. I treated you with contempt when you deserved only honor." Tears streamed down his face. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, "but if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. I'll start a foundation in Jake's Nemea for military families, so no Gold Star mother ever feels what you felt today." The Marines remained still, as silent judges of character. They didn't care about Tyler's money, they cared about his remorse, and the truth behind his words. Cheryl placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "Jake would want you to learn from this," she said softly. "He believed people could change. That's what he died for, so others could become better." Her forgiveness was quiet, but complete, and it came with a weight Tyler would carry forever. The guests, stunned, watched as he slowly stood. People who had known him for decades had never seen him like this. It was shocking, and it was deeply moving. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Reed said, returning to the podium, "we are gathered here not for a party, but to honor the memory of Sergeant Jake Mason, Medal of Honor recipient, and to recognize his mother, Mrs. Cheryl Mason, a Gold Star mother who has our deepest gratitude." As if emerging from a trance, the audience rearranged itself for the formal ceremony. Tyler took a seat in the back row, head bowed. Officer Kane and Officer Brooks, who had once tried to escort Cheryl out, now stood respectfully at the exits. This time, to ensure nothing would disrupt the moment again. At the center, surrounded by her son's brothers in arms, Cheryl stood tall, not as a guest, but as a symbol of sacrifice, strength, and enduring love. The ballroom shifted again. The chandeliers, once lit for status, now bathed the room in sacred light. Captain Reed adjusted his uniform, then stepped behind the podium. His voice was solemn, commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are here to honor Sergeant Jake Mason, whose valor, sacrifice, and courage have earned him our nation's highest military honor. The Medal of Honor is awarded only to those whose bravery transcends duty, whose actions reflect the highest ideals of humanity. Cheryl stood still, her eyes on the box in her hands. The weight of the medal was immense, not just physically, but emotionally. It was heavy with meaning, with love, with loss. Captain Reed continued, Sergeant Mason saved 12 lives in a narrow canyon in Afghanistan, under fire, outnumbered, alone. He knew what his actions would cost him, and he chose to act anyway. Master Sergeant Williams stepped forward. His courage didn't start on that battlefield, he said. It started in the home where he was raised, in the mother who worked 3 jobs, who sold her house so he could serve. Cheryl Mason, you are a hero too. The Marine saluted again, sharp, unflinching, reverent. Then Captain Reed opened a larger case and withdrew the medal. On behalf of the President of the United States, the United States Army, and a grateful nation, he said, I present the Medal of Honor, posthumously awarded to Sergeant Jake Mason. He placed the ribbon gently around Cheryl's neck. The blue fabric shimmered beneath the lights. She clutched the medal to her chest, tears falling freely down her cheeks. And for a moment, she felt her son beside her, his smile, his warmth, his spirit. Jake, she whispered. The room was utterly still, and in that silence, her whisper echoed like a prayer. I'm so proud of you, my brave boy, Cheryl whispered, her fingers clutching the medal as though it could bring her son back for just a moment longer. The room rose to its feet in unison, not out of social obligation but from something far deeper, reverence. These were not just guests anymore, they were witnesses to something profound. They had come expecting a routine ceremony. What they experienced was a transformation of a woman, of a legacy, and of themselves. They had seen true heroism, they had seen real sacrifice, they had seen dignity restored. In the back row, Tyler Blackwood remained seated. His head was bowed, his soul heavy. The applause thundered around him, but it felt distant, like a song he wasn't worthy of singing. The shame of his earlier cruelty had isolated him. But then, he felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. He looked up. It was Cheryl Mason. Mr. Blackwood, she said softly, her voice carrying only grace. Jake gave his life so others could have the chance to become better tomorrow than they were today. Don't waste that chance. She turned and walked toward the exit, the 8 Marines instinctively forming a protective column around her. Their formation wasn't just ceremonial, it was sacred, an honor guard for a Gold Star mother whose love had birthed a hero. As Cheryl passed, the crowd stepped aside in silence, parting like water before a ship of great meaning. Hours ago, they had looked at her with judgment. Now, they looked with awe. The ballroom doors opened, and she stepped into the afternoon light, Jake's Medal of Honor still shining on her chest. The Marines followed behind, each step echoing their vow to carry Jake's memory with them forever. 1 year later, a broken bar. The setting was simpler now, a high school auditorium in rural Alabama. No chandeliers, no polished marble, just folding chairs, worn floors, and the unwavering pride of a close-knit community. Cheryl stood at a wooden podium under a hand-painted banner that read, Jake Mason Scholarship Fund Day Opening Ceremony. We don't have much, she began, her voice clear and steady, but we have my son's promise. And now that promise is going to help other children step forward into their future. Applause filled the room, warm and genuine. Cheryl lifted Jake's Medal of Honor from around her neck and gently placed it into a custom display case that would hang permanently in the school's main hallway. Standing beside her was Marcus, a 14-year-old boy, the son of one of the Marines Jake had saved. Your son didn't just save my dad, Marcus said, his voice trembling but proud. He saved our whole family. Now I get to go to college, a broken bar because of him. In the back of the room, just barely visible behind the open doors, stood Tyler Blackwood. He didn't try to draw attention. He didn't speak. He simply watched, holding a signed check in his hand, one that would fully fund the scholarship for the next academic year. His redemption had not come through grand speeches, but through quiet, sustained acts of support, each one honoring the memory of the man he had once dismissed. 6 months later, a broken bar, the Jake Mason Foundation, had grown. Funded almost entirely by Tyler Blackwood's fortune, it provided, educational assistance for the children of fallen soldiers, housing support for Gold Star families, therapy and transition services for military widows and veterans. Tyler had changed. The man who once chased influence now chased impact. He no longer hosted high society galas. He attended military funerals, funded mental health programs, and quietly listened to stories like Jake's. Officer Kane and Officer Brooks, too, had transformed. They requested transfers to community outreach units, positions where they could make amends, where they could serve, not with power, but with compassion. They carried the lesson of that day with them into every neighborhood, every patrol. And Cheryl Mason, a once humiliated, now Riveretta, became a national speaker. She traveled to bases and schools, ceremonies and memorials, telling Jake's story. She reminded crowds that heroism isn't always loud, and sacrifice doesn't always wear a uniform. That sometimes, the greatest courage is found in ordinary homes, shaped by a mother's love. Jake's Medal of Honor became more than an award. It was a living symbol, a bridge between past and future, a reminder that valor is real, and that its impact triples through generations. Real wealth, Cheryl once told a crowd of new recruits, isn't what you keep, it's what you give. Jake Mason gave everything, and because of him, because of one soldier's bravery, one mother's love, and one man's redemption, the world was a better place. Who is your unsung hero? Tell us in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what courage, sacrifice, and humanity truly mean. From all of us at Ya Stories, thank you for watching. Thy negation, drop a comment. A currency I diaresis Sedilla, share this with someone who needs a reminder that goodness still exists. Thys I diaresis Sedilla, and always remember the heroes who walk among us.